China bold move in 2025. 2025 is shaping up to be a year of critical shifts, and global events suggest that significant changes are on the horizon. In the past, we often focused on the economic moves of the United States, given the wide-reaching consequences of its policy decisions. Whether it's through the impacts of money printing, raising interest rates, or military actions, the effects of U.S. decisions resonate globally. As former President Donald Trump is set to make a political return, there's an expectation that we'll witness more drastic developments, such as mass deportations, tariff wars, and even the potential weaponization of the US dollar. But today, our focus is on China. As the world's second-largest economy, China is increasingly positioning itself to distance itself from Western powers, a trend that began to become apparent in 2024 and shows no signs of slowing. President Xi Jinping, in his New Year address, reaffirmed his government's commitment to reaching a 5% GDP growth target for 2024, but he acknowledged that 2025 will present even greater challenges. Maintaining strong growth in the coming year will require drastic measures. China's economy is facing numerous obstacles, including a severe real estate crisis that has decimated a significant amount of wealth and dampened consumer spending. Moreover, trade barriers imposed by the G7 nations, particularly regarding electric vehicles, EVs, and solar panels, are adding even more pressure on the economy. These issues are far from coincidental and highlight the increasingly deepening divide between China and the West. For China to navigate these headwinds, the country will likely need to shift towards self-reliance, and with Russia as a strategic partner, it may have the resources to weather this storm. However, there's a significant challenge that must be tackled: inflation. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, projects that inflation in China will rise to 2% by 2026. However, current data shows that the country's GDP deflator is already negative, down by 1%, indicating that overall economic growth is being dragged down by deflationary pressures. This is particularly problematic for Beijing as it strives to achieve the 4% to 5% growth target in 2025. To address this, China will likely need to implement expansive stimulus measures, and it's already taking steps in that direction. For example, the government has raised salaries for civil servants by a modest 500 yuan per month, roughly $7 USD, which is a 4–5% increase for workers earning less than $1,500 a month on average. Public spending is crucial in China's economic model, much like it is in many G7 countries. By boosting wages, the government hopes to mitigate the effects of deflation and ease the housing crisis. In a sense, China's approach to economic recovery mirrors the West's traditional stimulus programs but with a unique local twist. Looking beyond domestic concerns, however, China is simultaneously preparing to decouple from the West while expanding its global influence. While the West, particularly the US, has become more vocal in its trade wars with China, Beijing is adopting a more strategic and less confrontational approach. If you listen closely to Xi Jinping's speeches, you can detect subtle shifts in priorities for 2025 and beyond. One such shift was his mention of China's growing agricultural independence. For the first time, China's grain production has surpassed 700 million tons, with a clear focus on increasing domestic food supply rather than relying on imports. This move suggests that China intends to reduce its dependence on foreign imports, a change that will have direct implications on U.S. agriculture. American farmers, already struggling with razor-thin profit margins, may feel the brunt of this shift. In fact, if the U.S. continues to rely heavily on immigrant labor, over 1.6 million undocumented immigrants were working in the U.S. food supply chain as of 2021. The situation could become even more precarious if large numbers of these workers are deported. The effects could be disastrous, especially if the ongoing trade war with China escalates. A repeat of the 2018 tariff war, which saw U.S. soybean exports plummet by 70% after China imposed tariffs, could severely hurt U.S. farmers if demand for American exports drops again. At the same time, China's global influence is steadily growing, especially in key industries such as electric vehicles. By 2024, China had produced more than 10 million new energy vehicles, EVs, marking a historic milestone. Chinese companies like BYD, which delivered over 4.2 million EVs in 2024, have gained considerable traction in both domestic and international markets. Even with tariffs from the EU and US blocking BYD from entering these regions, the company's aggressive pricing strategies have allowed it to thrive in other markets. For example, BYD's impressive sales figures are now approaching those of industry giants like Ford and Honda, despite having phased out internal combustion engines entirely since 2022. The battle between China's BYD and the US's Tesla illustrates a rapidly shifting automotive market. Tesla, with a market cap exceeding $1 trillion, had historically led the global EV market. However, in the final quarter of 2024, BYD surpassed Tesla in EV deliveries, outpacing the American automaker by 880,000 vehicles. Much of this growth can be attributed to strong local demand in China, where the government has invested heavily in subsidies to support domestic consumption. This means that even if trade tensions escalate, China's domestic companies will be less vulnerable to external pressure. Moreover, China may continue to limit the sharing of its EV technology with Western countries, reserving it for its BRICS partners and other close allies. The rise of the BRICS alliance, comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is also noteworthy. In 2024, new members like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand have joined, significantly increasing the bloc's global influence. These countries are emerging as manufacturing hubs, offering competitive production costs and the ability to meet both supply and demand needs. This not only gives BRICS an advantage in weathering global sanctions, but it also positions these nations as a counterbalance to the Western-dominated global economy. Furthermore, BRICS countries are increasingly bypassing the US dollar in favor of local currencies for bilateral trade. This shift has profound implications for global trade dynamics and represents a growing threat to the dominance of the US dollar, which underpins US economic power. As the BRICS countries increasingly sideline the dollar, US economic interests could suffer. The shift away from the dollar could lead to reduced demand for US Treasury bonds, weakening the country's economic standing. If the US intensifies its protectionist policies, particularly under a potential Trump administration, it could prompt a mass exodus of manufacturing jobs from China to countries like Brazil, Indonesia, and other BRICS nations. This would not only hurt US economic interests but also further isolate the US from its traditional allies. Additionally, the issue of Taiwan continues to loom large in China's geopolitical strategy. In a recent speech, President Xi reaffirmed China's commitment to reunification with Taiwan, emphasizing its One China policy. This issue has significant implications for US-China relations, as Washington has been increasingly involved in Taiwan's defense and sovereignty. The growing tensions surrounding Taiwan add yet another layer of complexity to the already volatile geopolitical environment. In conclusion, China's strategies in 2025 and beyond reflect a deliberate effort to shift the global order in its favor. While its focus on self-reliance, decoupling from the West, and expanding its influence through strategic alliances is clear, the road ahead will be anything but smooth. The coming years will be marked by escalating trade tensions, increasing competition among global powers, and potential disruptions to global supply chains. How China, the US, and other nations respond to these shifts will have far-reaching consequences. The future of global trade, economic policy, and geopolitical power is uncertain, and 2025 may very well be the year when the true scale of these changes begins to unfold.